Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. 45 male, was married to my wife, 39 female, for just 6 years. When we dated, she fell hard for me. I was and still am a pilot. Through my company, I get flight privileges and free tickets to anywhere. My wife also had a premium account since she flew with me on several occasions. Within the time we were dating and married, we went to 8 different countries. As an extravagant birthday present to one of her friends, my wife hosted a girls-only trip to Paris. She was living the life without having to work at all. I think this life of luxury, thanks to me, made it easier for her to bash her ex-husband all the time and continually express how glad she was to be rid of him. He was actually the one that filed for divorce against her, but that's just one of the things my wife lied to me about. I noticed that my wife was still connected to her ex via social media. I figured she wanted him to see her updates about how great our life was together. I didn't really care. That was the only thing I noticed before day. Several of my flights were canceled because 3 of the airline's planes needed inspection before their next flight. I decided not to tell my wife I was coming home early to see what she was doing with her day since she didn't have a job. I was surprised to find 2 cars in our driveway. When I entered the home, I didn't hear anything. I went upstairs, and that's when I heard noises. I felt something overtake me, knowing my wife was in our bedroom with another person. The door was locked, so I grabbed a hammer from the hallway closet. I bashed around the doorknob as my wife screamed until the door swung open. They were bug-eyed in bed, completely uncomfortable and scared for their lives. She was in our bed with the ex-husband she so boldly bashed. I screamed names at her and at God. I told her she was a liar and I told him he was exactly the piece of crap my wife said he was. He got dressed quickly and left. I wish I knew what he was thinking entering my home to sleep with his ex. He must have been a stupid idiot, and he's lucky I'm not a fighter. My wife then tried to touch my shoulder while holding the she around her and asked me not to do anything rash. I pulled away and said I was kicking her out the house. I told her I wouldn't consider repairing this relationship even if she was the last girl on earth. She was sobbing but did her best to act like she could handle me dumping her. She started packing her bags as if she could recover from this. In another room, I called her mother and told her everything. In turn, she told her father and the rest of her family. My wife left in her car without knowing that everyone knew what she'd done. She went to AP's house, where she checked her phone for any messages from me. She found none, but she did find a ton of messages from her family. They were scolding her for cheating on me, the greatest thing to ever happen in her life. They called me an honorable provider and said she was a moron for what she did. It was clear that they felt she should have left her ex in the past and they wouldn't be supportive of her after this. She left a voicemail for me saying I ruined her life by refusing to forgive her. She decided to leave the country with AP. So with their bags packed, they went to the airport. At the ticket counter, my wife tried to swipe the platinum flight card I provided for her, but it failed to go through since I had it canceled just 30 minutes earlier. She then immediately called me telling me that her card was not working anymore and that AP was no longer interested in flying with her. I guess he had a sudden change of heart about their spontaneous rekindling. Without any other options, my wife left the airport security office alone in her car packed full of luggage for her parents' house. She begged either of them to let her move back in, but they only stared at her with disappointment and turned her away. They couldn't resist letting her move back in after she was homeless for a few nights. Her mother couldn't believe her daughter did this after bashing her ex so much, so she called me. I told her everything that happened, how I felt, and how my ex thought I was wrong for failing to forgive her. With that, her mother told me she wanted to kick her out and asked how I felt about the idea. I told her to do it because my wife foolishly thought she could start a new life with AP after telling me what a terrible person he was. After vowing her commitment and love to me, she shouldn't get handouts from anyone. Look at what my spoiling did to her. Her head blew up with entitlement without any respect towards me, even though I was the one that allowed her to think this way. Her mother was convinced and kicked her out that same night. It's been 2 years and my ex has since found herself and her daughter a low-income apartment and a drug habit. Opie, your wife, is unbelievable. After you provided a life of luxury for your wife, she allowed her ex back into her life. I can't believe she had the nerve to bring him into your marital bed. It must have been her ego and entitlement blown through the roof. How could she not see that you were the only reason she had the things she did? It's a relief that AP came to his senses right there in the airport. No one deserves to have that unstable and untrustworthy woman in their life. She would only take advantage of them while looking out solely for herself. That's probably why her ex divorced her in the first place. Even though you married her, you still dodged a bullet and made excellent decisions in this time of crisis. It's lucky you discovered the truth now, never had children with her, and canceled her airline privileges so she couldn't escape her consequences and family shaming. I wish you the best of luck in life. Thank you for sharing your story. Now, let's get into our second story for today. 27 male, trusted my wife, 27 female, with all my heart. We were high school sweethearts that married with our parents' approval. She never lied and proved herself trustworthy to me and my family on many occasions. I grew up with my stepfather, so I trusted his judgment as well as my mother's. That's what makes my story so painful. Our seventh wedding anniversary passed while I was overseas, serving the country as a U.S. soldier. I had to spend much of my time away from home, but my wife knew of my military aspirations before we got married. She stayed at home, making about $100 a month with her knitting projects. She was supportive of me, took excellent care of our home, and always made amazing reunion love with me when I returned home. However, this time, when I arrived home after a 10-month deployment, something was terribly wrong. I hadn't heard from my mother, stepfather, or wife for a few months. Actually, I did hear from my mother, but it was always kept short, and she was very vague when it came to how my stepfather or wife were. She only said she didn't know why my wife wouldn't talk to me, but told me that whatever it was, I could get through it. That was the closest I got to any warning about what was going on. My wife looked sick and nervous when I walked through our front door, and she was wearing a huge t-shirt. I immediately went to hug her and felt her try to resist before I pulled her against me. I could feel a hard bump in her stomach pressing against me. Within a fraction of a second, I knew she was pregnant, and I knew I wasn't the father. I yanked her shirt up to reveal her mid-sized baby hump, and a scream came out of my mouth. She immediately broke down crying after hearing my scream and admitted that my stepfather forced himself on her. Hearing this was too much for me to process. As I got into the car, I heard her begging me not to tell anyone about it. That was an extremely odd request after telling me he forced her to become pregnant. I practically broke into my parents' house to find my mom, sitting knowingly in the living room with her hands folded on her lap. She stood up and gave me a long hug where I just cried. She told me she knew about the baby already and filed for divorce against my stepfather. I asked her if their affair was consensual, and she was certain it was. She found messages between them on AP's phone. I just took the day with my mother to grieve over this life-changing mistake each of our spouses made. My stepfather was the worst human being on earth. He betrayed me, the boy he raised as his own child, the boy he taught how to be a man by knocking up my wife while I fought as a soldier. Throughout the time I stayed with my mother and processed everything, my soon-to-be ex-wife continued texting and calling me, begging me to forgive her and help her pay for an abortion. She couldn't afford to live without me, which meant her fate was completely in my hands. I told her even if she got an abortion, this wouldn't be something I could just forgive and forget. She begged me to at least get her an abortion, even if I didn't want to stay with her. I told her to ask my stepfather for the money, or better yet, earn the money for an abortion by knitting her butt off as the fetus grows. I told her family about her predicament, but they already knew and already told her they would have nothing to do with her or the child. She would have to face these consequences alone, since she proved herself to be a self-centered harlot. I just laughed. Without any help from anyone and the court order for her to vacate the house, she was losing her mind. She had no skills besides her knitting and knew finding a steady job would be impossible for her, especially without a home address. Meanwhile, the baby keeps growing. She left voicemails and texts for me, saying she couldn't bear the thought of losing me, her husband, her strong, brave pro-diver. She continued blowing up my phone until I had no choice but to block her across all platforms. That was the last I heard of her. My stepfather has not spoken to me since all this happened. He doesn't talk to any of our family, even though he was a part of it for 25 years. It really is like he dropped off the face of the earth and proved that he was the terrible person he proved himself to be. He doesn't care about me or his unborn child, which is what bothers me the most. All I know is that after this experience, I vowed to be the best father I can to any children that enter my life. I already tried being the best husband I could be, but it didn't matter when I was apart from my wife. I'm done with my military service now and started dating a new woman. OP, you did everything you could as a husband, and it seemed like it was enough. The problem was your wife's infidelity and impatience for love and attention. She started an affair with one of the only men she had access to in her life, which was your stepfather. I don't know what he was thinking when he took your wife from you, but he probably wasn't thinking very much at all. Just know that this wasn't your fault. You were living your best life, providing financially and emotionally for your wife as best you could, only to be betrayed by her. All she had to do was remain as patient as you were while you fought, and she did whatever she pleased. You deserve better than this. You deserve a woman that can do the same thing you can for your relationship and marriage. This is a hard story to tell. My wife and I were married for 18 years. Some of the magic in the bedroom was fading, I'll admit that, but we were also parents to two children, 12 and 16 years old. In an attempt to rekindle our relationship, I got us a new bed frame and mattress, fit for royalty, along with lingerie for her. She loved it, and it actually did help us relax and have a good time. We worked a lot, so I made arrangements for my 22-year-old nephew to babysit for us. When my wife met him again for the first time in 5 years, he'd grown into a young man, and I saw her face. It made me mad. I actually brought it up with her, how her eyes sparkled when she saw him, and I reminded her he's only a few years older than our oldest. She thought I was being ridiculous and denied anything I saw. I'd known her long enough to know when she was excited or liked what she saw, she couldn't hide it. Fast forward another month, and there wasn't much of a change. Nothing that bad, but nothing that great either, even though I was trying. We each had something to do after work, separately, so I asked my nephew to go to our house to watch the kids again. My wife told me she'd be home at the same time as me. When I got home, her car was already there, and so was my nephew's. The house looked dark. I didn't find anyone downstairs, so I went upstairs, pretty nervous about what I was going to find. Our bedroom door was open, and the lights were on while my wife turned off the television. My nephew looked extremely nervous that I was home, seeing him in my bedroom. I asked what was going on, and my wife said nothing. They were just watching television after the kids went to bed. My nephew was silent, looking around the room nervously before he said he had to go. I paid him, hesitantly. He had trouble looking me in the eye. After he left, I noticed my wife's undergarments on the floor, nearly under the bed. I asked her if anything bad happened while I was gone, and she was caught off guard by the question, but she just asked what I meant and said no. I was just super uncomfortable laying in bed all night. The next day, I managed to pull myself together with an hour of sleep and sit in my car, ready to leave for work. Before I pulled out, my phone dinged. It was a long message from my nephew. He apologized for having sex with my wife last night. He said he couldn't sleep at all. He felt so bad for what he'd done, and he couldn't forgive himself until I forgave him. The poor kid didn't realize he stole my whole life away from me. Everything I worked for and built with my wife and the mother of my children was gone. I only replied to thank him for telling me, but I was devastated. I couldn't drive, I couldn't move. My wife came out to go to work, and I wouldn't move my car out from behind hers. She expected me to, so she sat in her car, waiting. She was on her phone and got a message from my nephew, telling her he told me what they did. I walked up to her window and could hear her on the phone, calling him a little turd for telling me, when she explicitly told him not to tell me anything. She was freaking out, and when she noticed me standing next to her window, she jumped out of her skin, then started crying. I broke down too, because it was hard to look at her. I told her everything we had was done. Over. I started walking back in the house, and she followed me, panicking and crying. She asked me to forgive her for this one mess up. In all the years we were married, she was loyal to me and the mother of my children. She didn't want me to break up our family just because of this one moment of weakness. I told her it wasn't just one moment of weakness, it was a moment she decided she would have sex with my nephew behind my back. It was a choice she made to betray me, her husband of 18 years. I told her I never wanted to see her again. She gave up on us. Our marriage got boring, so she gave up and cheated on me. I was sobbing, which made her sob. I wasn't worried about my ability to move on from this. I was crying for our kids. Their lives were going to change because of their mom. I was willing to stay with her through thick and thin, no matter what. I would sacrifice and communicate. Whatever it took, but it takes two. I told her to get out of the house. She hadn't brought enough change into our kids' lives. The least she could do was leave the house, so they didn't have to move with me. After arguing, she actually agreed, but warned me she was going to get custody of them. I didn't argue. I knew I could prove her infidelity and irresponsibility. In addition to that, the court ruled everything should remain as normal for the children as possible, so they continued living with me and going to the same school. My wife had to live with her closest relative for a while, an aunt that didn't know her very well and lived 45 minutes away. The kids were extremely upset. It isn't easy on anyone when a family is broken apart, and each time they spoke on the phone with their mom or saw her in person, it was awkward, and they wanted to know why she broke up with their dad. They told me she would cry when they asked, because there wasn't a good answer, and I knew she felt like a stupid, foolish woman. She eventually gave up carpooling to work in the area, but I think it's because even the people she worked with knew what she did. I became somewhat of a bachelor for the middle-aged women in town, and I couldn't complain. Someone else started watching my kids, but I never told the kids why. Opie, I am so sorry your wife gave up your marriage and bond of 18 years to sleep with your nephew. It's extremely disappointing to hear, and I wish she would have thought about the effect it would have on her kids, you, and herself. The whole point in getting married and having children is to find where you want to be for the rest of your life. Surrounded by people you would do anything for, who trust you completely, and some people you actually made and brought into the world. It's a wonderful thing that people should take more seriously. The world has always been broken, but a successful lifelong marriage shouldn't be as rare as a unicorn. These respectable unions where each spouse puts the other before themselves should be everywhere. If it was so, we would live in a much happier world. The things people have the nerve to complain about are nothing compared to living your life alone, or living a beautiful life that's taken for granted until it's gone. Anyways, that's enough for this story. Let's now get into our second story for today. My wife, 36, and I, 37, were married for 10 years, and it was already time for a kitchen renovation. We each earned a decent amount of money, so for her birthday, I thought she'd really appreciate it if I arranged a contractor to come by and start working on it. After that, I did the planning and picked out what I thought my wife would love most. She was so surprised and happy. While they were busy renovating for the next few weeks, my wife was home alone while I was away on a work trip. She didn't know that I left the cameras on in the house because I wanted to supervise the people I was paying. I didn't think anything about the cameras, so I didn't tell her about them. One day, 20 minutes after she should have gotten to the house, I asked her how she liked it. I got no response after 10 minutes, which just wasn't like her. I thought of the security cameras, but I didn't think I needed to check on her or anything. I just wanted to make sure she got there safely. I was then surprised to see her making out with the guy remodeling our kitchen. I watched in disbelief from my phone's live camera feed. She took him by the hand and went into the living room. I could just barely see something happening. I freaked out, obviously. I started calling her repeatedly as I drove home. It was a 2-hour drive back, and those were by far the most painful 2 hours I've endured in my life. I didn't tell her what I saw, only that we had to talk immediately. I hated her for what she just did so boldly, as if she didn't have a husband of 10 years that loved her and was helping to pay the man she slept with in the house we lived in together. When I barged into the house, I could see the fear on her face. I told her that I saw what she did on the security cameras. She came out, apologizing to me with all her heart. It was crazy to look at her face knowing what she did today. For some reason, she chose that guy to betray me with. During her rambling, she said he looked at her a certain way when she came downstairs in her robe, and when she stopped by to check on them, he came onto her. I knew it didn't matter, but in the moment, I wanted to prove her wrong and see how this started. I pulled up the recording earlier in the day, and my wife hid her face as I did so. It showed her speaking with AP super close. She bent over right in front of him and moved her shirt over, clear signs she wanted him to make a move. It made me sick. I couldn't believe she didn't think I had the cameras on. I felt like I was watching someone else completely. I hated her. I immediately fired the crew that were working on the house. I told the boss why, and even showed him the recording. He fired AP on the spot. I don't know how I didn't beat the crap out of him. It was great to see him fire though. I moved back into the house without a kitchen and got started on divorce and telling our families. I had the video evidence, but I didn't have to show it to anyone in the family for them to believe me. After we separated, she called me every day to apologize for cheating, ask how I was doing, and if I needed anything. I'd usually tell her to stop calling me, and that all I needed was a smarter woman. This happened about 3 years ago, and since then I've been single. I've had a few one-night stands, but nothing serious. I'm not sure when I'll be ready to commit again. Opie, I am sorry your wife completely took advantage of your trust and thought she could get away with cheating on you. You were doing something so nice and considerate to surprise her for her birthday, and she repaid you by doing this inconceivable act. Each step you took was so wise. I'm relieved that you didn't consider giving her a second chance. That's honestly never a good idea. People make mistakes and must face the consequences of them. When a spouse forgives them, it makes them an enabler. They won't learn respect or the value of loyalty. After the door to infidelity is open and the two stay together, there will either be a consistent feeling of guilt and worry or an eye for an eye kind of attitude, and that is no way to have a healthy and happy relationship. Your ex certainly had the harsh reality coming to her from her own actions. I wish you the best of luck in healing from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I never like goodbyes, especially the rushed ones just before heading out on a business trip. This time, as I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling about Linda, my wife. Lately, something about her seemed off, but I chalked it up to stress and the long hours I'd been putting in at the office. See you in a week, honey, I called out, trying to sound cheerful. Linda, sitting on the couch, barely looked up from her phone, offering a half-hearted wave. Safe travels, she muttered, her eyes never meeting mine. As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at our house, a beautiful two-story nestled in the suburbs. It was the kind of place that screamed success, the kind of success I had worked tirelessly for. Little did I know, what I'd worked so hard to build was starting to crumble from the inside. The next day, while I was halfway across the country, buried in meetings and presentations, Linda was not alone. She'd invited her childhood friend Mark over. I'd met Mark a few times, a seemingly decent guy with an easy laugh and a penchant for storytelling, but something about him had always rubbed me the wrong way. It started as a casual visit, or so Linda would later claim. A cup of coffee in the afternoon, a chat about old times, and the occasional laugh that lingered a bit too long. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, their conversations shifted, the atmosphere in the room growing more intimate. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to them, they were not the only ones aware of this secret rendezvous. Tom, my best friend since college and neighbor, had started noticing something odd about the frequency of Mark's visits. Each day, as he walked his dog, he saw Mark's car parked outside my house. One night, hidden by the shadows, Tom watched as Mark left our house well past midnight, a satisfied smirk on his face. It didn't take long for these casual visits to turn into something more. The laughter became whispers, the looks exchanged between Linda and Mark grew more intense, and the distance between them on the couch lessened with each visit. They were no longer just friends catching up, They had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Tom, ever the loyal friend, wrestled with what he'd seen. He knew he had to tell me, but the weight of such news was a heavy burden. He debated, paced, and finally, one sleepless night, he made the call. "Jack," he said, his voice strained. "I think you need to come home. Something's not right." I remember feeling a jolt of panic, a sense of impending doom. I wanted to dismiss his concerns, tell him he was mistaken, but the unease I'd felt when leaving now roared back with a vengeance. I booked the next flight home, my mind racing with every possible scenario but hoping against hope that Tom was wrong. The moment the plane's wheels hit the tarmac, my heart pounded like a cocktail of emotions was brewing inside me as I rushed through the airport. My mind kept replaying Tom's words, each replay twisting the knife a little deeper. "Something's not right," he had said, and he was damn right about that. Back at our house, Linda was playing a dangerous game. The thrill of her secret rendezvous with Mark was like a drug, each visit leaving her craving more. She'd convinced herself she deserved this, that it was just a harmless adventure, but behind that thrill was a shadow of guilt that she pushed away into the darkest corners of her mind. With each day that passed, Mark became bolder, more comfortable in my home, in my absence. He'd walk around like he owned the place, leaving traces of his presence. A coffee cup here, a book there. My home was turning into his playground, and Linda was all too willing to let him play. The neighborhood was not blind. Whispers turned into talks, and talks into rumors. Our once quiet and friendly community was now buzzing with gossip about the frequent visits of Linda's friend. Old Mrs. Jenkins next door, who never missed a thing, watched with hawk-like eyes as Mark's car became a regular fixture in our driveway. She'd shake her head and mutter to herself, "Something ain't right with that woman." Meanwhile, I was on my way back, my mind a raging storm. I wanted to deny it all, to believe that there was some other explanation. But deep down I knew. The signs had been there, and I had chosen to look the other way. Not anymore. I drove from the airport, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. With every mile closer to home, my heart raced faster. I wasn't just coming back early from a business trip. I was about to confront the ugly truth that had been hiding in my own bed. Linda, oblivious to the impending storm, continued her dance with danger. She laughed a little louder, smiled a little brighter, lost in her world of deceit. But the walls were closing in. The neighborhood's eyes were watching, and I was coming home. The car turned into our street, and there it was. Mark's car, sitting in my driveway, bold as brass. My breath hitched, a mix of fury and pain clenching in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. If you've enjoyed what you've seen and want to stay updated with more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to keep bringing you more of the content you love. Plus, subscribing ensures you won't miss out on any of our future updates. It's a win-win. Thanks for being a part of our community. My hands were shaking as I parked behind Mark's car. The sight of it sitting brazenly in my driveway ignited a fury in me I never knew I had. I got out and stormed towards the front door, ready to confront the betrayal head-on. The door wasn't even locked. That's how careless they had been. As I stepped inside, the sounds that greeted me shattered the last piece of denial I had clung to. Laughter. Her laughter. And not just hers, his too. It echoed down the hallway, a cruel soundtrack to the scene I was about to witness. I moved silently, fueled by a cold, seething anger. The living room door was ajar, and through it I saw them. Linda and Mark, lost in their own world, a world where they thought they were safe from consequences. The sight of them together, in our home, on our couch, was like a punch to the gut. Without a second thought, I pushed the door open. The look on their faces when they saw me. It was a mix of shock, fear, and something that looked like guilt. But it was too late for guilt. "What the hell is this?" I roared, my voice echoing through the room. Linda jumped up, a pathetic attempt to cover herself with a throw pillow. Mark, that coward. He just froze, like a deer caught in headlights. "Jack, this isn't what it looks like," Linda stammered, her voice trembling. But her words were empty, meaningless. I wasn't there to listen to lies. Mark finally snapped out of his daze and bolted for the door, not even bothering to grab his clothes. He just ran, half naked, down the driveway to his car. I watched him go, the part of me wanting to chase him down, but I knew he wasn't the one I needed answers from. The sound of a car engine revving up broke the tense silence. I looked out the window just in time to see Mark's car speeding away, recklessly. He was desperate to escape, but in his panic, he wasn't watching the road. The screech of tires was deafening, followed by a thud and a scream. My heart stopped. I ran outside, fearing the worst. Down the street, Mark's car had swerved, narrowly missing a child on a bike. The kid was shaken, but thankfully unhurt. Neighbors poured out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Back inside, Linda was still standing there, tears streaming down her face. "Jack, please let me explain," she pleaded, but her words were drowned out by the chaos outside. The betrayal, the crash, the near miss, it all blended into a cacophony of disbelief and rage. The neighborhood was in an uproar, parents comforting their child, others calling the police, and there I stood, amidst the wreckage of what used to be my life, feeling a sense of detachment from the chaos around me. Blue and red lights splashed across the front of my house, casting long, eerie shadows on the lawn. The police had arrived, their presence a stark reminder of how quickly my life had turned into a scene straight out of a crime drama. I watched from the doorway as they handcuffed Mark, still half naked and looking bewildered. He didn't resist. Maybe he realized the gravity of what he'd done, or maybe he was still in shock. Either way, he was going to pay for his recklessness. The sight of him being led away in handcuffs should have brought me some sense of justice, but it didn't. The damage was done. Inside, Linda was a mess. Tears had ruined her makeup, and her hair was disheveled. She looked small, fragile, but I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for her. She had made her choice. "Jack, please. You have to understand," she begged, reaching out to me. I stepped back. Her touch was the last thing I wanted. "Understand? Understand what, Linda? That you betrayed me in our own home?" She tried to defend herself, saying she felt lonely and neglected, that I was always working, always away. But her words sounded hollow, like excuses rather than reasons. The trust we had built over the years, the love I thought we shared, it all crumbled in the face of her betrayal. I didn't want to hear any more of her justifications. The only call I made that night, after the police had left and the neighborhood had quieted down, was to my lawyer. "I want to file for divorce," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. The news of the scandal spread like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in our social circle knew. Phone calls, texts, whispers at the local coffee shop. The story of Linda's affair and the dramatic confrontation was on everyone's lips. Some expressed sympathy, others shock, but all of them had the same underlying question. How could she? The gossip wasn't just confined to our friends. Neighbors who had once greeted us with warm smiles now looked at us with a mix of pity and judgment. Our once peaceful community had turned into a hotbed of rumors and speculation. It was suffocating, knowing that our private life was now public fodder. As I lay in bed that night, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of the evening. I couldn't sleep, images of the day's events replaying in my mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, the arrest. It felt like a nightmare, but I knew I wasn't going to wake up from it. The morning after the arrest, the house felt like a tomb. I packed my bags silently, each shirt, each pair of jeans, a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. Linda was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the bedroom, drowning in her guilt and shame. I didn't care to find out. I threw my bags into the car and drove off, leaving behind the house that was no longer a home. My destination was Tom's place. He had offered his guest room the moment he heard about the fiasco. "Stay as long as you need," he had said, a true friend in the midst of my personal hell. Meanwhile, Linda, desperate and alone, reached out to Mark. She called him, texted him, but all she got in return was cold rejection. "You've brought this on yourself," he told her, blaming her for the mess they were both in. The irony of his words was lost on him. He had played his part, but now he was casting her aside, a sinking ship he didn't want to go down with. The divorce proceedings started soon after. My lawyer was a no-nonsense guy, sharp as a tack. We had evidence of the affair thanks to Linda's carelessness and Mark's arrogance. Proving infidelity was straightforward, but that didn't make it any less bitter. Linda's fall from grace was swift and brutal. The same social circles that had once welcomed her with open arms now turned their backs. Invitations dried up, phone calls went unanswered, and her once bustling social media accounts became ghost towns. She had been a queen in our little world, and now she was an outcast. Word of the scandal inevitably reached my business associates. I braced for impact, expecting whispers, judgments, maybe even a loss of respect. But surprisingly, the fallout was minimal. There were some raised eyebrows, a few awkward conversations, but my professional life remained largely unscathed. It seemed that success and money provided a shield, even against the taint of personal scandal. As I settled into life at Tom's place, I realized how much of a facade my marriage had been. The house, the parties, the social standing, it was all just window dressing, hiding the rot underneath. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the guest room, my mind racing with what-ifs and how-comes. The days turned into weeks. I went about my business, meetings, calls, deals, but it was all mechanical, void of the passion I once had. My life had been upended, and I was just going through the motions, trying to find some semblance of normalcy in the chaos. As the dust settled on the ruins of my marriage, life, as they say, had to go on. I had moved past the initial shock, the burning anger, and the relentless questioning. What remained was a mix of relief and an aching void, a strange cocktail of emotions that accompanied me through my days. On the other side of town, Linda's reality had taken a drastic turn. Gone were the days of leisurely brunches and shopping sprees. Now she was pounding the pavement, her resume in hand, searching for a job. But the job market is cruel to those who have been out of it for too long, and Linda was learning that the hard way. Her days of being a socialite didn't translate into marketable skills, and her once envied life became her biggest hurdle. After numerous rejections, she finally landed a job, but it was far from the glamorous life she was accustomed to. Linda, who had once hosted lavish parties, was now a housekeeper, cleaning other people's messes. The irony of her situation was a bitter pill to swallow. Meanwhile, I was trying to piece back my life. Tom suggested I reach out to old friends, reconnect with people who knew me before my life became a tabloid headline. It was awkward at first explaining my sudden reappearance, but to my surprise, many were sympathetic. They offered beers, a listening ear, and a welcome distraction from the chaos that my life had become. But for Linda, there was no such escape. At her new job, she was a pariah. The whispers followed her as she moved from room to room, her coworkers snickering behind her back. They knew who she was, or rather, who she used to be. The once proud and poised socialite was now the subject of pity and scorn. In this new chapter of my life, I found solace in small things. A night out with friends, a quiet evening with a book, a solo walk in the park. The relief of being out of a toxic relationship was palpable, but so was the loneliness. I missed the companionship, the connection, even if it had been built on a lie. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the new normal began to take shape. Linda, struggling in her new role, faced her reality head-on, a far cry from the life she had once led. And I, in my newfound solitude, started to rediscover who I was before my life became entwined with hers. Life, after all the drama, had started to settle into a new rhythm, but it was a tune I was still learning to play. The scars of betrayal don't just vanish, they linger, questioning every smile, every kind word, and especially the prospect of new love. I had started to dip my toes back into the dating pool, but the waters were murky. Each date was a minefield of doubts and insecurities. Could I trust again? Was I reading too much into innocent comments? The shadow of Linda's betrayal loomed over every dinner, every conversation. I was out there trying, but my heart was still caged in a fortress of mistrust. Linda's life, on the other hand, was unraveling further. Her parents, once proud of their socialite daughter, now offered only limited support. Their conversations were strained, filled with unspoken disappointment and veiled admonitions. They helped where they could, but it was clear that they disapproved of the choices that had led her to this point. Then came the trial of Mark, the infamous lover. The local media had a field day. Reporters dug up every juicy detail, splashing Linda's name all over the news as the other woman in a scandalous love triangle. It was sensationalism at its finest, and Linda's already tattered reputation took another beating. Through all this, Tom remained my rock. He was more than just a friend now. He was a brother. He had my back, offering advice, a joke when I needed a laugh, and silence when I needed to think. His support was unwavering, a constant in the sea of change that my life had become. Linda's fall from grace was cemented when she moved into a small, run-down apartment in a less desirable part of town. The stark contrast to our once luxurious home was a testament to how far she had fallen. She was now a shadow of her former self, living in a place that mirrored her inner turmoil. As I navigated the uncertain waters of new relationships, and Linda grappled with her new reality, our paths continued to diverge. We were like two ships that had once shared a harbor, now sailing in opposite directions towards vastly different horizons. The news came to me during a casual catch-up with a mutual friend. "Have you heard about Linda?" she asked, her tone laced with a mix of concern and curiosity. I hadn't, and part of me didn't want to know. But the news she shared hit me harder than I expected. Linda was living in hardship, struggling to make ends meet in her new reality. Despite everything, hearing about her difficulties stirred something in me. Not enough to rekindle old feelings, but enough to make me pause. It wasn't long after that Linda reached out. Her message popped up on my phone one evening, a simple, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, the past and the present colliding in those three words. Part of me was curious, but the larger part, the part still nursing wounds and rebuilding trust, hit delete. I wasn't ready to open that door, not even a crack. Meanwhile, Mark, the man who had played a starring role in our personal drama, faced his own reckoning. His trial, a spectacle for the local media, ended not with the clang of a jail cell, but with a gavel sentencing him to community service and a fine. No jail time seemed like a slap on the wrist, a mere inconvenience for him, while the rest of us lived with the repercussions of his actions. Linda's attempt at reconnection had been rejected, but life had more humiliation in store for her. In a twist of cruel fate, she ran into some of our former friends while running errands. The encounter was far from pleasant. There were awkward pauses, forced smiles, and thinly veiled disdain. She was an outsider now, a pariah in the world she once ruled. The humiliation was written all over her face as she hurried away, leaving behind whispers and judgmental glances. For me, these events were mere ripples in the pond of my new life. I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. My days were filled with work, friends, and the occasional date, each a step away from the past. But the news of Linda's struggles and the public shaming she endured served as reminders of the tangled web our lives had once been. As I lay in bed that night, the city lights casting shadows on my ceiling, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey, from love to betrayal, from anger to healing. It was a path I never expected to walk, but one that had led me to a newfound strength. Linda's choices had set us on this course, but where it led us was worlds apart. Creating a full 2,000-word narrative is a bit extensive for this format, but I'll provide a strong beginning for Chapter 9, focusing on the specified events in the style that suits your YouTube channel's needs. Months had passed since the divorce, and with them, the storm of emotions had settled into a calm. I was finding peace, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that accepts it and moves forward. My focus shifted to personal growth and my business, a beacon of stability in the chaos that had been my personal life. It was during this time of rebuilding that I heard about Linda's declining health. The news came unexpectedly, a passing comment from a mutual acquaintance. "Linda's not doing so well," they said, a note of concern in their voice. The news struck a chord, but I made a conscious decision to stay distant. I had my path to walk and she had hers. Our roads had diverged, and looking back wasn't an option I was willing to entertain. While I was finding my footing, Linda's world was crumbling further. The stress of her new life, the shame, the regret, it was all taking a toll on her health. She was a shadow of the woman she once was, worn down by the consequences of her choices. Her living conditions, far from the comfort she was used to, only added to her troubles. One evening as I sat at my office going over reports and plans, a sense of accomplishment washed over me. My business, which had weathered the storm of my personal life, was not just surviving, it was thriving. I had reached a significant milestone. A deal that I had been working on for months had finally closed, bringing in a surge of new opportunities. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to my resilience and determination. Meanwhile, Linda was coming to terms with the reality of her situation. Alone in her small apartment, the weight of what she had lost hung heavily around her. She was facing the consequences of her actions, a realization that was as painful as it was necessary. The life she had known, the people she had surrounded herself with, the status she had enjoyed, all were gone. For me, the success in business was more than just a financial win, it was a reclaiming of my identity, my confidence. I was no longer just the man who had been betrayed, I was a businessman, a fighter, a survivor. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of strength and self-assurance. As the final chapter of this saga unfolded, the paths Linda and I walked couldn't have been more different. Time, they say, heals all wounds, but it also reveals the true consequences of our choices. Linda, in her quest for some semblance of normalcy, reached out to her family. Their response was tepid at best. They offered support, but it was clear their disappointment ran deep. There were no warm embraces, just reluctant acceptance. She was trying to mend bridges that had been burned to the ground, finding solace in the smallest gestures of kindness from those who once showered her with love. On my end, life had taken a turn for the better. My friends who had seen me at my lowest now looked at me with a newfound respect. They saw a man who had been through the ringer and had come out stronger. I became an unwitting figure of resilience, a role model for overcoming personal adversity. The admiration was flattering, but it also served as a reminder of how far I'd come. But life always has its ironies. And for Linda, it came in the form of a job that took her to familiar places, but under vastly different circumstances. One day, her cleaning job led her to the house of one of our former friends. The humiliation was palpable as she cleaned the floors of someone who had once been a guest at our parties. The roles were reversed, and the reality was a bitter pill to swallow. Amidst all this, something unexpected happened to me. I met someone. She was everything Linda wasn't, genuine, humble, and with a deep sense of integrity. Our relationship blossomed on the foundations of trust and commitment, values that had been sorely missing in my marriage. She brought a sense of peace and happiness that I hadn't known was missing until I found it again. The story of Linda and me was drawing to a close. Her journey had taken her down a path of introspection and regret. Alone in her small apartment, she reflected on the choices she had made, the bridges she had burned, and the life she had lost. The realization of her actions and their consequences was a lonely journey, filled with what-ifs and if-onlys. As for me, I was rebuilding a life that was richer and more fulfilling than I could have imagined. The pain of the past was still there, a dull ache that perhaps would never completely go away. But it was overshadowed by the hope of a new beginning. A life filled with love, trust, and the promise of a brighter future. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking stories. Hit the bell. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. In today's story, Opie found out his wife cheated on him after he caught his wife trying to sneak her affair partner into their house. He then confronted the affair partner, and things escalated quickly. Little does the wife know that he has been recording and writing down everything she has been doing with her affair partner to set himself up for nice revenge when they go to court. Let's get into the story. She cheated. I'm figuring it out, and it hurts. Hello everyone. I, 34 male, found my wife, 33 female, in our bed with another man. A little background. For the sake of my sanity, I will refer to my wife as Ellie. My best friend's name is Omar, not real names. Ellie and I met in college and hit it off right away. When we started dating, I was not really assertive. You could accurately say that it was her showing interest and desire in me that made me really begin to value myself and work past a ton of insecurities I used to deal with. I was just a hardworking, nerdy, smart dude, but had never had any real luck with women. To me, it was almost incredible that someone as smart and beautiful as her would show as much interest in me as I showed in her. We both have always been driven, which led us separately building small businesses of our own by the time we graduated college. We moved in together after graduation and a year later, married. We had, what I considered, a very strong marriage. We had weathered family tragedies, professional challenges, small and large disagreements, and always managed to work through everything, and I felt it always made us stronger. Ellie has always had a huge social circle that included a fair number of men, but I never thought too much about it, as she never did anything that raised flags, since all social outings seemed to always be as a large mixed group, and I came to trust her closest friends. As our 10-year anniversary was coming up, I decided to bring up the topic of starting a family. Early on in the relationship, we had together decided to compromise on the size of our family. I wanted kids, she wanted none or at most one, so we agreed on having one. Now, 10 years into our marriage, secure economically, and thinking how healthy I thought our relationship was, I brought the topic up. I can't help but think me doing this may have started this whole chain of events. A little over 3 months ago, she tells me she is going out with her friends to have some fun. She basically told me she needed to unwind, as she was getting stressed about me asking about having kids again. That night, she comes back at 4 a.m. Starting with that day, our bedroom goes completely dead. In our relationship, Ellie has always initiated as much as me. In fact, on average, I would say more often than me, and for rare periods, when we were dealing with traveling, I can't think of us ever going more than 5 days without some form of intimacy. She starts going out more, guarding her phone, avoiding me, all this stuff I had never seen from her before. After about 3 to 4 weeks of this, I talk to Omar, my best friend, and he points me to Reddit, and I start reading. Eventually, I decide I need to do something about this, as it's beginning to put me in a bad mood. I don't just want to trust her, I like to trust my wife. I need to trust her. Well, needless to say, I get my hands on her phone and check her calls and texts, feeling like a complete monster violating her privacy. Turns out that one of the people new to our social circle is an old high school flame from before we were together. The more I dug, the more I found. I think the fact I'd always trusted her completely made her complacent about hiding the affair better. I found out that during that party a month before, he had attended, and they spent all night catching up and ended up kissing, not even really hiding it from her whole group of friends and then conveniently going to the bathroom at the same time. Up to this point, all I had felt has been this giant pit of anxiety in my stomach, a part of me trying to hold on to the image of the woman I thought I had married, a kind of self-delusion. But the anger and sadness start getting overwhelming, made worse by the fact that she seems oblivious to my sudden indifference. She didn't notice. I had stopped making romantic gestures. I felt like I was breaking inside. Finally, a month ago, I decided to catch them in the act, and I tell Ellie I'm going to visit my cousin for the weekend. He lives 3 hours away, but instead I go stay with Omar, who has been helping me record and copy everything. I waited, and sure enough, she brought him to our house to our bed. I snuck in the house and made my way to our room, and the sounds left no doubts. They were so into it, they didn't notice me standing there at the door recording them with my phone. I literally felt something in me break, like something in my soul snapped so hard I could hear it. My veins went ice cold, and something like a 10-ton anvil had been dropped on my chest. I couldn't breathe, I went numb. The next part one can only tell you what Omar says happened because I only remember parts of the next few minutes. According to Omar, who I had brought as a witness, apparently I walked up to them, pulled that guy off of the bed, and Omar pulled me off of him. I remember Omar holding me down on the ground. After that, There was the normal hysterics of being caught. I went no contact for 5 weeks and began working with a lawyer preparing for the worst. Omar served as her contact point during that time since I simply didn't want to talk to her. I only contacted my family and told them that we were having problems. After the 5 weeks of no contact, we met and talked. She was remorseful, told me it wasn't my fault, that it was all her doing, her responsibility and her decisions. We decided to go to marriage counseling and at least explore if there is anything salvageable. Sitting here, I can't believe that, even after that, I still love her. I'm disgusted with myself that I have thought about her well-being, about her happiness. I especially hate that now I have to question our entire relationship. Was it just now that she got brazen about cheating, or has it happened before and I didn't bother looking far enough or was too stupidly trusting to see it at all? It's now been almost a month since deciding to try marriage counseling, and my questions to those who have already gone through this are the following. 1. Is it possible to reconcile without feeling that you lose some self-respect? 2. How long does the anger to sadness to numbness, rinse and repeat cycle last? I'm getting exhausted at the constant emotional roller coaster. 3. I find myself really loathing the whole idea of having to essentially be on the constant lookout. Is that a sign of me wanting out or just me being exhausted? Because I honestly can't tell. I'll take any advice, honestly. I love her. I've been head over heels for her since we met back in college. I want to work it out. Is it actually possible? And if it is, will it ever resemble what it used to be, even remotely? TLDR, wife cheated, trying to reconcile but have a lot of fears and questions. After reading everyone's replies and the messages, I took the weekend to let it all sink in and harden my resolve. I came to the conclusion that I was never going to be able to live with myself if I stayed with her. Staying and working on it would mean having to sacrifice a significant portion of my self-respect. I also realized that I want no part of a relationship that would require me to be in a state of constant vigilance for signs of betrayal. So I decided to push the proverbial red button and nuke it all. Here's how it all went down. Monday, I woke up early to an unexpected surprise. When I opened my eyes, my Johnson was greeting me at full attention. Guys, I can't stress how surprising that was to me, considering that since finding out about Ellie's affair, I had not had morning wood. It was like my body was saying, hell yeah, we're going to get this done today and be done, ready for something new. I actually laughed so hard at seeing it that Omar and his wife came to check in on me, thinking I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I got up, got ready, and called Ellie's dad and told him we needed to talk. I met with him about an hour before our marriage counseling. The whole drive there, I was surprised at how calm I was about it. I could still feel an ocean of emotion somewhere deep down, but on the surface, I was not feeling anything. We met up at a little mom and pop breakfast place near his house, and we sat down. Ellie's dad is a good man, light-hearted and funny, but more importantly, he is level-headed. I thanked him for how he and his wife had treated me all these years and told him I was sorry to have this talk with him. He listened patiently, but as I started telling him why I was going to be divorcing his daughter, he lowered his head. I could tell he was ashamed and angry, not at me, but at Ellie. He told me he understood, and I asked him to not tell Ellie as I was going to be telling her within the hour. He agreed, we shook hands, and then he told me to take care. I hated having to shatter his image of her. I debated with myself if I should have asked him to care for her, but I shouted down that instinct because he is her dad. Of course he will care for her, but also it is no longer my business to care for her. She is a big girl. Next, I went to our scheduled marriage and counseling session. I had been rehearsing all day Sunday what I would say to her and how I would say it. I wanted to essentially emotion-proof my actions and words for the next few hours. I sat there in the parking lot for 10 minutes and just prayed. I hadn't felt like I wanted to or could since all this started. When we sat down for marriage counseling, Ellie was wearing one of the dresses I loved her in, and for a split second, I forgot everything, but then the visceral disgust and anger I felt pushed the attraction completely out. I let the counselor get things going like our previous sessions, and after about 10 minutes of her and Ellie talking, I interrupted. This is how it went. Excuse me, I have a few things I need to say to Ellie, and that I wanted to be able to say here with a neutral third party. If at any point I am interrupted, I will simply leave, and that's that. Ellie, I have come to realize I do not need to know if this was the only time you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how long it went for. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how many times you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know why. Even if there was a good reason, a perfectly why, it also would not matter. The only thing that matters is that you did. I know now the only facts that matter. You are never going to have children with me. At this, Ellie opens her mouth to interject, and I started walking to the door, so she immediately backed off. You are going to string me along for however it would take. You are going to cheat on me sooner or later. This is when the waterworks started to open up for her. You do not respect me or love me. The counselor begins to look like she is about to interject, and I respond by taking another step toward the door, which ends that. My lawyer is filing for divorce as we sit here, and as of about an hour ago, your father knows the entire truth of what has been going on. Do not contact me. From here on out, the only person we will communicate through our lawyers. These are the last words we will ever exchange. Goodbye. I walked the last few steps to the door and walked out. As soon as I closed the door, I heard a wail, the likes of which would haunt people's dreams. She scrambled out of the office pursuing me and tried to stop me, telling me how sorry she is and how we can start a family and to give her a second chance, and she cried hysterically throughout. I pushed past her and got in my car and left. At this point, that ocean of emotions that had been quietly hiding underneath it all started roiling, and I was barely holding it in. I drove to my parents' house and sent the text message I had planned to Ellie's best friend's husband. When I got home, my old man was at the store, but Mom could tell I wasn't well. She has always been able to read me like a book. I told her I needed to tell her and Dad something important, and we sat down and waited. At this point, I have to thank Responsible Mode 114 for messaging me, which added, and he totally calmed me down. About 30 minutes later, Dad arrived. I poured it all out. The more I talked, the more I felt that ocean of emotions emptying and all that pain pouring out of me. When I finished talking to my dad, he just held me as I cried into his shirt for a solid 20 minutes. When it all ended, I felt spent and oddly at peace. I have arranged for Omar to receive a Harley he has been eyeing for a while. He has been more than a friend to me, and I'm going to try my best to be as good a friend to him as he has been to me. I can't wait to see his face. I think this is the last time I will post, as it should be the end of the story. I just want to thank you all. Would have never thought that I would find sound and sane advice from strangers on the internet. I know that it will be a long road ahead, that I will still need individual counseling to deal with the aftershocks of this debacle and rebuild my ability to trust. I have to hope that little by little, all this pain and sadness and anger will go away. Like Roto-Rooter for my soul, if I do the work. Now begins the rest of my life, and I can honestly say I am looking forward to it. Wow, Opie, the way you handled the situation was outstanding. Kudos to you. You dropped the bomb right in the middle of your counseling session with her, which is even more epic. The good thing is that now the worst days are behind you, and from here on out, it will get better. As you mentioned, your wife simply wanted her cake and to eat it too, which explains why she came crying and chasing after you like a lost puppy after you told her your intentions. Best of luck to you in the future, Opie. Let's see what the comments had to say about this situation. ArmorTeague227 said, "My dude, you handled yourself like a boss and with class and self-control, and not only confronting her at marriage counseling, but taking the initiative and holding her accountable not only to her cheating, but that she no longer would hostage your heart and soul. And in the very place where many in your position as a man the narrative would spin in her favor, you took control not only from your ex, but the therapist as well. This was your true therapy. You took the steps in reclaiming your life back. I couldn't be more proud, my man. I know it hurts right now because taking down that wall when crumbling is draining, but you will survive this. You will rebuild to be something new, stronger, more powerful, and I guarantee you this is the moment where your life begins again. Congrats to you, man. It might not feel like a victory, but you have just laid the gauntlet down for a better world than yourself, brick by brick. You will find happiness again. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking stories. hit the